The first sign something was wrong wasn't the email, it was the look on Mr. Zhao's face when I tried to pull up the updated contract draft and the system kicked me out. Midway through the dessert course at a rooftop restaurant in Singapore, skyline glittering, client laughing, deal practically inked, I got logged out. I chalked it up to spotty Wi Fi. But then came the email. No subject line, no greeting, just 4 sentences from HR. Your position has been deemed redundant. Effective immediately. Please contact us with any questions. All access has been suspended. I stared at the screen while the steam from my jasmine tea curled into the air like it was mocking me. My thumb hovered over the reply button. Instead, I locked the screen, set the phone down beside the porcelain plate of untouched mango pudding, and looked back at Mr. Zhao, who was still talking about regional tax offsets like the world hadn't just yanked the rug out from under me. I nodded. I smiled. I even cracked a joke about time zones making everything feel surreal. Then I excused myself to the bathroom, shut the stall door, and leaned my head against the cool tile wall like I was bracing for a tornado. Back in my hotel lobby, I handed my corporate card to the receptionist to extend my stay 2 nights. Standard protocol until final signature. The woman behind the counter swiped it once, then again, her lips twisted in that universal hospitality grimace. I'm sorry, Miss Reynolds, it appears the card has been declined. You want to talk humiliation? Try standing in 4-inch heels, blazer soaked in rooftop humidity, pretending like you don't hear the 2 men behind you whispering in Mandarin, while you're last tethered to the job you've poured 5 years into just snaps in public. I paid the balance on my personal card, smiled like a pageant queen on Prozac, and rode the elevator back up in silence. So yeah, while Kyle was probably somewhere back in New Jersey trying to figure out how time zones work, I was getting booted from the biggest international deal of my career via email. Not even a call, not even a goddamn subject line. Real quick, if you're listening and you're not subscribed yet, it'd mean the world if you did. And yeah, dropping a like helps more than you'd think. It keeps our small team of caffeine-fueled storytellers motivated to keep unearthing these wild tales of corporate backstabbing and sweet, sweet revenge. Okay, back to the mayhem. I opened my laptop, locked, tried Slack. Gone, even my internal email was bricked. My name, Patricia Reynolds, Senior Director of International Strategy, was apparently dust now. Vanished from the org chart like I'd never existed. At that point, it would have been easy to spiral, cry, scream, call my old boss and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I cracked open the minibar, poured one of those offensively tiny gin bottles over a single ice cube, and sat by the window overlooking the bay. I sipped, I stared, I thought. Because unlike them, I remembered what was in Clause 6.14. I remembered who drafted it. I remembered every damn line. And I knew even then, sitting barefoot in a hotel robe at 2 a.m. with a frozen corporate card and a career shoved through the shredder, that the real show hadn't started yet. They thought they'd erased me. But all they'd done was pull the trigger. Morning after the execution by email, I tried to pretend I still had some tether to my team. I started with Marissa, my assistant for the past 3 years, the kind of woman who could schedule a 12-country tour without breaking a nail or misplacing a boarding pass. I texted her first, need a copy of yesterday's site logistics report. My access is blocked. No response. I waited 50 minutes, called her cell, straight to voicemail. I tried texting the senior analyst, Jamal. He was the one who flagged the currency discrepancy in the Brazil projections. No answer. I hit up our compliance contact, the junior ops coordinator, even the new intern I'd only met over Zoom. Nothing. It was like I'd become radioactive overnight. Then finally, just as I was contemplating whether my LinkedIn password still worked, I got a single message from Marissa. Just one line. They reassigned us. Kyle's running point now. No sorry. No are you okay? Not even a rogue emoji. Kyle, of course. The last time I saw Kyle in person, he was trying to figure out if he needed a visa to go to Puerto Rico. I once overheard him say Morocco was that little island off the coast of Italy. He wears those shiny loafers with no socks like he's cosplaying Wolf of Wall Street, but he can't spell procurement without spell check. Kyle, our VP's nephew and apparently the next great hope of international expansion. He'd been sniffing around my team for months, poking at my slide decks, showing up to meetings he wasn't invited to. The VP called it exposure. I called it a slow-motion hostile takeover with loafers and too much cologne, and now, apparently, they'd handed him the entire operation. Mid-deal, while I was 9,000 miles away, working 12-hour days to secure a contract worth more than the VP's beach house in the Hamptons. No warning, no transition, just Kyle. I didn't scream, didn't cry. I sat on the edge of the bed in that sterile hotel room with its fake plants and overpriced mini Pringles and let the silence thicken around me. My phone buzzed once and Uber Eats promo. Not even HR had the decency to follow up. It's a strange kind of grief, and ghosted by people you trusted with your professional life. You spend years building something, relationships, workflows, reputations, and then overnight, it's like they've all been instructed to pretend you never existed. I could picture the Slack messages flying back and forth. don't engage. Legal said it's clean cut. Was it? Because unless someone had deleted every version of the contracts I drafted, Kyle was sitting on a landmine he couldn't even read properly. Clause 6.14 wasn't just a vanity stipulation, it was insurance. It was the kind of clause you slip in when you've seen too many good people get chewed up and spit out for the sake of quarterly optics. And I didn't just write it, I negotiated it, translated it, and got the client's general counsel to initial it personally. Every version, every update. They wanted to scrub me out of the story? Fine. But they forgot who held the pen. That afternoon, I didn't bother chasing down anyone else. I booked a local co-working space for the day, paid with my own card, and asked them to print a hard copy of the latest client-side contract draft when I still had saved in a private cloud folder. I took the file, folded it neatly, and tucked it into my leather portfolio like it was a sleeping cobra. Then I turned off my phone, walked back to the hotel, and sat by the window again. No calls, no texts, just the quiet hum of the AC unit and the rising certainty that I didn't need revenge, I just needed time. Because Kyle might have taken the wheel. But the brakes were mine. It's funny how invisible you can be while doing everything. I drafted that deal. Literally. Every clause, every contingency, every comma debated over 10 rounds of emails between me, the client's legal team, and 3 different translators. I still remember arguing over the term stabilization period with Mr. Zhao's counsel while eating instant noodles in a Beijing airport lounge at 2 a.m. That deal was my creature. My fingerprints were on every square inch of it, which is probably why no one at Atlas Bridge actually read it. They liked having me around for damage control, for client smoothing, for cultural finesse. But once the fireworks were ready to launch, they wanted someone more visible to light the fuse. Someone like Kyle, who wore tailored suits and called himself a global strategist because he once ordered Thai takeout with extra spice. Clause 6.14, that's where the magic sat. A named continuity provision. Sounded innocuous, buried in the boilerplate, right between dispute resolution and force majeure. But it was sharp, razor sharp. It required that I, Patricia Reynolds, be present through the post-signature stabilization period, usually 30 days unless I personally authorized a transition. No authorization, deals voidable at the client's discretion. Terminated without cause before that point, trigger clause activated. The client insisted on stability. I gave it to them in writing. And I made sure the language favored them, not the company. Because after years of watching leadership play musical chairs with project leads mid-deal, I knew eventually they'd try it with me. They just did it too soon. I hadn't been fired for cause. There were no performance issues. No formal warnings. Just an operational restructure that conveniently promoted Kyle into my office while I was 13 hours ahead and halfway through building the most lucrative deal we'd ever landed in Southeast Asia. And because no one thought I mattered past the kickoff, no one remembered what was buried in those 42 pages of client-side documentation. They wanted to erase me, but I had laced that contract with a heartbeat, and now they'd pulled the plug. I didn't reach out to legal. I didn't call my old boss. I didn't respond to Kyle's obnoxious appreciate your groundwork email from the week before. I just sat in my co-working space, sipping bitter black coffee and watching the sun crawl over the Marina Bay skyline, waiting. Because when you draft a bomb into a document, you don't yell when they start playing with the wires. You wait for the click. There was a power in that silence I hadn't felt in years. No scrambling, no reapplying, no explaining myself to middle managers who couldn't locate Singapore on a map. Just this quiet, measured control as I watched the fuse burn. The file sat in my Dropbox, timestamped, versioned, and mirrored in 3 locations. The client had a copy. Their legal team had signed it, stamped it, and stored it in their compliance archives. Every bit of it was real, binding, alive, and like all good clauses, it didn't bark. It bit. So I shut my laptop, gathered my documents, and walked back to the hotel as the city lights blinked on around me. Somewhere in the Atlas Bridge boardroom, they were probably toasting Kyle, drafting press releases, updating their investor slide decks with revenue projections from a deal they no longer legally controlled. And me? I just waited. One clause, one pen stroke, one time detonation. I didn't need to call anyone, they had already lit the match. The first time I saw the photo, I nearly laughed out loud into my coffee. Kyle, standing dead center in my office, grinning like he just split the atom. White button down, sleeves awkwardly cuffed to show off his watch. His hair slicked back with whatever hedge fund slime they sell in the midtown barbershops his uncle probably recommended. Behind him, 3 of my former team members, smiling like hostages. In the background, my hand-painted world map still hung on the wall, the one I picked up at a street market in Lisbon after signing our first EU contract. His caption, 95% wrapped. Honored to lead this final push with an incredible team. #global success #leadership in action global success, huh? Last I checked, he didn't even know which side of the date line Singapore sat on. The man once asked me if LATAM was a type of investment fund. I stared at the photo for a long time, not angry, just detached. like watching someone wear your skin as a Halloween costume. Then came the internal newsletter, ordered by a friend in payroll who still had a pulse and a conscience. With a streamlined international strategy, we're excited to enter Q4 under fresh leadership. Streamlined, that's what they called it. There was even a quote from the VP: "Sometimes restructuring is about vision. We needed agility, and now we've got it." He held a champagne glass in the photo like he just conquered feudal Japan. The quote was pasted next to Kyle shaking hands with the CFO, two men who had never stepped foot in a single negotiation room, now basking in the golden glow of a deal they hadn't lifted a damn finger to build. My name, scrubbed, replaced, vanished from internal deal memos, system access logs, meeting invites, and cloud drives. One file still had the initials PR in the version history, but Kyle had renamed it to Master Final KL. Cute. Even the Zoom recordings, my voice guiding the client through platform integration, were edited out of the latest investor highlights reel. I know because someone sent me a copy, anonymously, with the subject line, "Hope you kept your receipts." I did. For about 20 minutes, I stared at Kyle's smug LinkedIn post and scrolled through the comments. Execs chiming in with heart emojis, recruiters offering to connect soon, one particularly nauseating reply from the VP's wife. "So proud of you, Kyle. Knew you were destined for greatness." I could practically hear the clink of champagne glasses echoing from across the Pacific. And yet, beneath the absurdity, I felt nothing sharp. No heat, no fresh wound, just a dull kind of curiosity, like watching an amateur magician pull scarves from his sleeve while the real trick is happening under the table. Because here's the thing: the more they erased me, the more they buried their own fate. I thought about Clause 6.14 again. Not just the paragraph itself, but the absurdly meticulous email thread that led to its final wording. The legal approval, the client-side initials, the version logs. It wasn't just a clause, it was a trap they'd set for themselves with a bottle of Veuve and a false sense of security. And the most delicious part? The clock was still ticking. They didn't even know the deal was broken yet, so I did what any ghost might do. I closed the laptop. I poured myself another drink, and I toasted them from halfway across the world. Cheers to the blind, drunk on their own power, celebrating under a roof made of sugar glass. The fall would come. I didn't have to push. Gravity would handle that. 3 days after Kyle's victory lap on LinkedIn, the storm clouds finally rolled in. I was sipping coffee at a small cafe near the Singapore River, the kind where the servers already knew I liked my toast extra burnt and my eggs runny. My phone buzzed once. New email? The sender wasn't HR, wasn't legal, wasn't anyone from Atlas Bridge, actually. It was Mr. Zhao's legal team. The subject line: "Immediate attention requested. Clause 6.14 leadership change notification." I didn't open it right away. I let it sit there in my inbox while I stirred my coffee and watched a boat drift under the bridge. The hum of traffic, the click of utensils. It was almost peaceful, like the calm before a symphony's first note. Eventually, I tapped it open. The email was direct, surgical, a polite but unmistakable declaration of unease. They'd noticed my sudden disappearance. No handover, no explanation. They referenced Clause 6.14 by name. "We require clarification regarding the removal of the named continuity officer outlined in 6.14b. At this time, you're reevaluating participation due to what appears to be an unauthorized leadership change." I could hear the blood draining from someone's face back in HQ the moment that line hit their inbox. The client wasn't mad, yet they were doing what smart clients do when they smell smoke near $180 million, stepping back, checking the terms, and circling the wagons. Their legal department had already begun review. And here's where it got truly exquisite. Kyle, who, until this point, had been the human equivalent of a stock photo, decided to respond himself. My source inside the client's team forwarded his reply, all of it. He opened with "Hi, Mr. Zhen," which would have been fine if the client's COO wasn't named Mr. Zhao. Strike one. Then he assured them there was no disruption in workflow or executional integrity. I don't know what corporate flavor of Mad Libs he pulled that from, but the phrase was so vague it practically screamed, "Please don't look too closely." He closed with, "Let's jump on a quick Zoom so I can walk you through our next steps." No time zone check, no suggested window, just the kind of lazy outreach that made it obvious he assumed everyone else would rearrange their day around him. My contact at the client's office summarized it best in one line: "We're losing faith." By noon, it escalated to their external legal counsel. The words "material breach" were mentioned, not loudly, not officially, but whispered enough that I knew the walls were vibrating back in the glass tower Kyle was now pretending to run. I didn't do anything. I didn't gloat or forward anything or call anyone. I just took a walk along the water, past the Merlion statue, and let the late afternoon sun warm my skin. I felt oddly serene. They'd chosen Kyle. It cut me loose with no warning, no severance, no grace. And now the man who once asked me if South Korea was part of China or like, close by, was trying to hold together a high-stakes international agreement with a coffee mug that said "world's best strategist" and a LinkedIn quote from Elon Musk. Meanwhile, the client was quietly preparing for war. Back at HQ, the champagne had gone flat. The victory parade had stalled, and the phrase reevaluating participation was ricocheting through boardrooms like a sniper's bullet. I imagined the VP pacing, red in the face, asking who signed off on Kyle's leadership claim. Legal flipping through pages they never actually read. Compliance pulling their hair out trying to find a paper trail that didn't exist. But the best part? They still hadn't called me. Maybe they thought silence made them look strong. Maybe they were scrambling to fix things without admitting the error. Or maybe, just maybe, they still hadn't realized I wasn't gone. Not really, because ghosts don't leave, we linger, quiet, watching, waiting, until the walls begin to crack. It started as these things often do, with a whisper. Not a public freakout, not an all-hands meeting. Just a soft, worried murmur that slipped out in the wrong elevator at the wrong time. Client stalling, something's off. I'd heard from 3 separate sources, none of whom knew the others had reached out. All former colleagues, one in finance, one in compliance, one in marketing who just happened to overhear the tail end of a conversation between legal and the CFO. Apparently, the Southeast Asia deal, Kyle's 95% wrapped masterpiece, was now on indefinite review. The client hadn't responded to 2 follow-up proposals. Their legal team had started requesting meeting transcripts and clause histories. And someone in compliance had finally done what nobody else had bothered to do in weeks. They read the damn contract. It was a junior analyst named Erin, fresh out of law school, who pulled clause 6.14 out of the fog. She didn't mean to blow anything up. She was just preparing a due diligence binder for investor review and cross-referencing all active client-side agreements. She flagged it, highlighted it, and slid it into the morning digest like any other risk notation. 10 minutes later, it was on the general counsel's desk. The GC, old school, sharp, the kind of woman who'd once fought a patent case over the exact placement of a hyphen, read the clause once, then twice. Her frown deepened. Did nobody read this before we reassigned her team? Silence. Someone from HR tried to pipe up, something about standard procedure. Someone else in strategy blamed legal for not flagging the clause. Legal blamed ops for not escalating the contract changes. Ops blamed project delivery for not issuing a transition protocol. The blame game had begun. Across departments, panic bloomed in tidy little bursts. Meetings sprang up. Calendar holds were sent. Someone compiled every email sent in the last 60 days mentioning the word Patricia. Redacted reports started circulating, my name reappearing like an unwanted ghost in every attachment. Meanwhile, in Singapore, I was sitting by a rain-streaked window in a quiet cafe, sipping oolong and watching droplets snake down the glass like lazy little knives. I hadn't said a word to anyone, not a press release, not a LinkedIn rant, not even a smug text to an old colleague. Just tea. I could almost hear the tension back in the States, the rustle of paper, the clack of high heels in marble hallways, the thin veneer of control cracking with every new forwarded email. They were starting to piece it together. That I hadn't just managed the client, I'd built the entire deal. The architecture, the materials, the damn plumbing. And the clause they skimmed over because it was probably just boilerplate. That clause was now a live grenade with a timer no one could read but me. And I was in no rush. Let them sweat. Let them flip through memos and try to remember who approved what, when, and why. Let them ask where Kyle got his transition authorization from, and then discover the authorization never existed. Let them panic when they realized the one person who could fix this wasn't answering her phone, not out of spite, but because she simply didn't have to. Back at Atlas Bridge, the board had started asking questions. Not publicly, not yet, but the murmurs were growing louder. How did we lose control of a $180 million deal? Why is the client citing breach language? Who approved the leadership change? And the biggest question of all, why wasn't Patricia consulted? They were pulling at threads now, tugging on knots they'd tied themselves, and every inch they unraveled led them back to one inconvenient truth. They thought they'd fired a name on a spreadsheet. Instead, they exiled the architect holding the master key. I took another sip of tea. The rain kept falling. And somewhere across the ocean, the walls began to shake. The moment investors caught the scent, everything changed. Up until then, the chaos had been mostly internal, panicked Slack threads, backroom whispers, desperate blame shifting between legal, compliance, and HR. But once money got nervous, that's when the circus hit full volume. I got the first whiff through an old friend in investor relations who texted me out of the blue. Heads up, your ghost is rattling some very expensive chains. Turns out, a managing partner at Halworth Equity, Atlas Bridge's second largest institutional investor, had caught wind of the client's reevaluation. Not from the company, not from a press release, but from a friend at the client firm who casually mentioned during a golf round that the deal might be off. Might be off. That little phrase sent a ripple through the stockroom like a shark fin in a swimming pool. Halworth didn't wait. They demanded an urgent investor call with the executive team. 48 hours later, the board chair was on the line, alongside the CFO, the GC, and yes, our good friend Kyle, who reportedly showed up with color-coded talking points and a nervous tick in his left eye. First question, why wasn't legal consulted before leadership was reassigned mid-negotiation? The second, Why was the original architect of the deal removed without a documented transition plan? And the third, my personal favorite. Who is Patricia Reynolds, and why haven't I heard her name until now when apparently she wrote the clause that's killing this deal? I wasn't on the call, didn't have to be. But my name, for the first time in weeks, was suddenly everywhere. I received the VP's message late that afternoon. It came through a private email address I hadn't seen him use since we worked on a China rollout 3 years ago. No subject, just a one-line body. Hey, Patricia, could you maybe help us out with something real quick? That maybe really sold the desperation. I stared at it for a while. I could almost see him sweating through his monogrammed shirt, pacing in his office, trying to craft the message that sounded casual and not like a man clinging to a crumbling cliff edge with 2 fingers. I didn't respond, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I didn't owe them clarity. They'd made a choice. They'd bet the house on a well-connected amateur and shoved the woman holding the foundation out the door without so much as a backward glance. And now, they wanted a favor. Atlas Bridge was in a tailspin. The client had frozen all communications. Legal was preparing for a full clause audit. Compliance was getting grilled on why a named continuity provision wasn't flagged in any internal transition docs. HR was backpedaling so fast you could smell the burning rubber. And me? I was at a rooftop bar, watching the sun melt behind the skyline, sipping a drink someone else had just bought me for helping them sort through a supply chain nightmare I solved in 15 minutes. I felt good, not smug, not vindictive, just good, cool satisfaction rising like a tide. Not because they were failing, but because I didn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. They were undoing themselves with every meeting, every panic call, every investor question that began with "How did this happen?" and ended with "Who let her go?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't file a complaint. I didn't storm into the office demanding answers. I wrote a clause. They lit the match. Now they were choking on the smoke. The call was scheduled for 8 o'clock a.m. But by 7:47, the conference room at Atlas Bridge HQ was already full, too full. Everyone from legal, compliance, strategy, and what remained of the executive team packed in with the brittle tension of people who had spent the last week pretending things were fixable. But now, with Halworth pressing for answers, the board breathing down their necks, and the client team gone radio silent, the last fig leaf of control had fluttered to the floor. At the head of the table sat the general counsel, glasses perched low on her nose, flipping through a hard copy of the contract like it was a bomb disposal manual. She looked tired, angry too, but not in the "who did this" kind of way. More in the "I already know who did this and none of you are qualified to survive it" kind of way. Page 31, she said flatly, and read it aloud. In the event of involuntary removal of the named continuity officer without documented performance breach, all obligations, pre-contract entitlements, and exclusive rights are voided at client's discretion. The room went still. The CFO, normally a man of spreadsheets and smirks, went pale. You could see it happen in real time, the math running through his head. $180 million evaporating with one sentence. The VP opened his mouth, closed it, and blurted, "But the client can't they just, I mean, if we explain," the CEO cut in, voice low. "She wrote that, didn't she?" No one answered, they didn't have to. Kyle sat frozen, hunched forward in his chair like a high schooler caught copying homework. The word named might as well have been carved into his forehead. Someone coughed, someone else shifted in their seat, and the general counsel just closed the folder with a soft, damning snap. She not only wrote it, she said, she made sure it was initialed on both sides. Legal, client, operations. She structured it so tightly that the client can legally walk and take everything with them. The VP muttered something about bad timing and miscommunication, but no one was listening anymore. Because just then, a new email pinged onto the projector screen. They'd had it mirrored up to show investor correspondence. It was from the client's counsel. The subject, formal withdrawal Southeast Asia expansion agreement. The body was concise, clinical. The client was exercising its contractual right to void the agreement due to involuntary removal of the named continuity officer without cause or transition. Effective immediately. All collaboration suspended. No room for negotiation. No appeal. Just done. The CFO swore under his breath. Kyle looked like he might throw up. The CEO just leaned back in his chair, stared at the ceiling tiles, and let out a long, low sigh, the kind of sound men make when they finally realize the wolf chewing through their front door was one they let in themselves. No one said Patricia's name. Not directly. But she was there in every glance, every sideways shift, every busted ego folding under the weight of its own arrogance. She hadn't sued. She hadn't tweeted. She hadn't written some viral takedown or given a smug press interview. She'd written a clause, just one. And now the house they'd built on her blueprints was collapsing in slow motion, brick by flaming brick. In a small cafe oceans away, Patricia sipped her tea and watched the day unfold, the same way a watchmaker observes gears turning exactly as designed. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply waited for the final piece to fall. It hit the newswire at 9:06 a.m. Eastern. Due to internal mishandling and contract breaches, we are terminating talks with Atlas Bridge, the client's official statement read. Clear, public, surgical. It was picked up by every major business outlet within the hour, nestled between headlines about market volatility and earnings season forecasts. The stock price took all of 11 minutes to drop 14%. By noon, it had lost 21. Calls flooded in, from analysts, from shareholders, from partner firms who'd hitched their Q4 projections to the Southeast Asia deal, now lying in pieces on the conference room floor. Halworth Equity dumped a third of its shares before lunch and released a separate statement calling for immediate structural accountability from Atlas Bridge leadership. Translation: heads needed to roll. The board didn't even wait for sunset. At 3 p.m., closed-door session was convened. By 3:47, the CEO, the VP, and the general counsel were no longer with the company. No fanfare, no golden parachutes, no press conferences, just a sterile internal memo titled Leadership Realignment and Forward Strategy. 3 bullet points, 3 names, 1 final sentence, effective immediately. Somewhere during all this, someone from HR must have decided to finally try and do damage control. I got an email, generic, rushed, and almost tragically polite. "Hi Patricia, hope you're well. We'd love to reconnect and explore opportunities to align again moving forward. Perhaps there's a path to collaborate on future initiatives. Let us know your availability." I didn't reply, not because I was bitter, not because I wanted revenge, but because I was busy. By the time that message landed in my inbox, I was already consulting for a rival firm, one that had watched the entire Atlas Bridge debacle unfold and offered me a seat at the table before the ink on the press release had even dried. The client? They didn't just respect the clause, they admired it. Their CEO told me during our first call, "We want someone who protects the foundation before anyone even notices it's cracking." That was my real job all along, not the title, not the office, not the fleeting praise on a quarterly earnings call. Work, and I did it well enough that when the storm hit, I didn't need to throw punches. I didn't need a podium or a mic. I didn't need to beg for recognition or scramble for receipts. I just had to wait. Because what they didn't understand, what they never understood, is that real leverage doesn't scream. It whispers, it waits. And when it lands, it doesn't need applause. It only needs one signature. I watched the fallout from my new office, a sunlit corner overlooking the harbor. A better view, a better team, a better story. I set my phone down, closed the laptop, let the silence stretch. I didn't raise my voice, I just raised the claws. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.